Good late Thursday or late Friday, meteorologist Casey Cloud here in the Weather Center right now, giving you a look at the wind gust here, along with our alert information in regards to a coastal flood warning. Definitely a nor'easter type situation, a coastal storm here. We have a front, we have a low developing, and that's something that is a big weather story here as we're looking at things that is kind of cleared off all the other information on this to kind of isolate some of these gusts because you see over 40 miles an hour, some tropical force gusts there in eastern Duval County being noted here in the last little bit. I know you don't see it all on here, but there's a 47-mile-an-hour gust at Mayport and a gust there as we were looking at things toward Jack's Beach to 41, as well as that 43 that's showing up on that map. So some pretty nasty gusts here with this overall meteorological situation. Definitely a tricky one. I don't have like the wind advisory on here, but we have that in play towards some of those coastal counties. I've been tracking that here. I know a year ago this morning we were tracking a Hurricane Milton going by toward the south here as we were looking, and we had some impacts in the southern counties. This is nothing like Milton, in terms of just the sheer magnitude for the state. Though we are getting, it's still a situation we have beach erosion and rough conditions along the coast. They're not enough to turn the logo red, but still, right at the coast is not a pleasant, beach night, beach morning coming up, anything like that. As we're looking and as we're tracking things here, I'll go ahead and switch on over to the radar with the wind arrows. You have to see the Doppler, radar here, really indicating the axis more in the coastal waters than over land right now. We did have a flash flood warning over Brevard County in east central Florida earlier tonight as I take some of this off so you can see things a little bit better. I know you can see the northeastern winds, the nor'easter type of condition on the other map, when we had those gusts that were so high, and then on this map with the arrows, but you see toward like south central Georgia, some rain there, but that's actually a little bit heavier right now as we're looking toward Tipton and toward that area there. And then as you see toward east, there's a general thunderstorm risk. Doesn't include Bradford here, so high school football, not expecting any thunderstorms. There could be some shower acts, and the rain chance has gone up a little for that Friday here, unfortunately. More so for our eastern counties. We're concerned about some of those games having some nasty weather, more so than Bradford. I have 50-50 in Bradford. It's less to the west, more to the east here in general as we're looking here and tracking things. But you can kind of see, I know we'll be, this kind of, not exactly, but, so it's a thunderstorm risk, especially, east of 301 there, US 301. I mean, it's a little bit further east of that, generally, looking at Bradford-wise and, like there. But you kind of get the idea. We're watching things, we're tracking them here, just watching some of these pop up, areas here where they'll kind of, strengthen a little bit, with some of this accent coming in from the Atlantic and then the accent will weaken. So that's something that we're watching here for sure as we're looking at the Doppler technology. In fact, let me go ahead and see what I can do here on our other source. I'm going to try to loop the radar around to kind of say this a little bit better, so bear with me here. I'm just loading some different attributes here on our other screen. So let me go ahead and switch this on over. Now you can kind of see some of this rain accent off toward east. A lot of it's going to stay over the waters with the low developing going more further north. We see some accent in like Flagler County here and the like. So, some of that trying to come in there right now as we're looking at the loop. Some of that's ground clutter, around Duval County. But we'll go to the end of the loop again. You see some of this coming in there right, barely into Flagler really, because that's Volusia down here. But a little bit of Flagler getting some of this. You have more of this. Some of this will hold together. Some of it won't. As we're looking and as we're tracking things here in toward the weather center. So we're just going to be mindful of it all. Very, isolated power outages in theory would be in our, probably happening and our possibility as we look ahead. But again, that's more to the east than anything. We actually do need rain in some areas because there's some drought concern, which I'll get to here in the full forecast. I know it's kind of odd. I'm a little concerned, some of our western areas, if we're not getting the rain and we're getting some wind, that could be a bit of an issue here. It's very, very important, to just be aware here of anything that looks, out of the ordinary with smoke or anything like that. Or, obviously you cannot be throwing those cigarettes out. If you are a smoker there or something like that, you cannot do that because, if you throw that out your window into the grass and then it catches that on fire, you're responsible. And, you have to obviously be responsible for whatever consequences of those actions may end up being. So very, very important, in terms of, all of that here. I know we just have to be very careful, even though it's weird talking about rain and some risk. We've had the flash flood warning towards east central Florida. It's kind of odd talking about that. But as you'll see in our maps, especially in South Georgia, a little more concerned up there. As we're looking at some of our zones, you see some rain more off to the east here, east central Florida lately. But look at all this rain. Storm total amounts in Seminole County, Florida, so over 6 inches, 6.5. Brevard's been getting hit hard, over, half a foot in a few backyards even, as you total everything together here recently. So that really does tell the weather story around Vero Beach here, over 8 inches according to our storm total estimates off the radar there out of Melbourne. So that definitely does tell the weather story. Got to be very mindful of all that here, obviously, as we're looking and as we're tracking things. And now you see this here with the rain. It's not tropical. Not expected it to become tropical as we're looking at things. Let me make sure the Hurricane Center hadn't sent anything new out on that here lately because, the latest outlook did just recently come out. There's nothing on that. We do have a tropical type system out there now with the K name, and that is the Tropical Storm Karen there way out in the Atlantic. No threat at all as we're looking, 45 north on the maps there, a lot further south of Tropical Storm Jerry, but that's expected, to recurve here, become a hurricane eventually, and then recurve, as it's, doing that, strengthening into a hurricane, maybe east of and south of Bermuda right now. As in fact, let me see that a little bit better here. I can say that to you on here, of course. You see the forecast is staying east of Puerto Rico right now. That's good news. And east of Bermuda. And then you see we have another system. This is Karen up here. Let me put on our Atlantic infrared satellite. So let me put that on here. And then this should load and you'll kind of get an idea. Karen, Subtropical Storm Karen looks like almost nothing out here. Quite honestly, it is a very, small area there that got that designation. And then we do have, this is a lot more to it, obviously, with Jerry, but the pattern's causing us to recurve to the north. And that's great news for everybody as we're looking toward, the southeast U.S. Puerto Rico, even east of them, it looks like some of these areas down here, I know they're getting closer to it, further on in the Caribbean and the like, but this is expected to recover. There's a lot of moisture with that. We have this act in the east of Florida, really going to be more, of just a pattern here where it's already kind of cool, and this is more of a nor'easter low. It's cool up here, not snow type cold generally. I know some of them are right now below freezing, but it's kind of that pattern. We have a coastal low going to cause some big coastal flooding impacts along the eastern seaboard here. It's a bigger deal than maybe it looks like here because it's not, a snowstorm. It's not, a tropical system. It's kind of in between that time frame for those areas further up north. So we'll just have to kind of be mindful of that. There are going to be some impacts as we look further on up there, in toward the timeline. But let me just go ahead and continue to look at things in the Pacific. Ocean there, they're tracking some entities here. The Hurricane Center is, and we're going to have moisture coming toward Arizona and the desert southwest, and that could be a problem as we look ahead. I know some of the models were, the American model, the GFS model, are the same thing there. Those words interchangeable, and it was so in a really bad outcome for maybe areas around Tucson. It had at least trended away from that. I'm just going to double check it because, I want to make sure nothing's changed. Yes, it's trended away from it for south, eastern Arizona, southwestern New Mexico, keeping it more into toward Mexico, the country there, as we're looking at things with some very bad flooding concerns out in this part of, that region, and not bringing it up as much in Arizona, but Tucson needs to remain on alert because things can change. We saw it with, the remnants of that system that went into Texas there for 4th of July. Things changed. The models really didn't pick up on it, and we had all those fatalities there, in central Texas with that hill country flooding. So I want you to be alert there on Tucson, because if we were to get with some of the models had some previous, half foot of rain, something like that. That could be disastrous for a area like this here, desert area, if they happen over a pretty short period of time. And the timeline on this would be getting in there, maybe more in toward that Monday, give or take. Later Sunday, Monday, yes, there. It kind of does vary, and it may not come into fruition if things aren't as powerful, which is what we want to see. Things not as powerful, obviously. Let me switch over to the west version here of this so we can see things a little bit better. Some of this moisture coming in, it will be an issue. We have the other area here too. Just all sorts of different things out there. So just depending on how much moisture holds together, could make the difference between, flash flooding and dangerous in some yards, some road areas, some communities, or a catastrophe. It's not out of the question, that Tucson has a disastrous outcome out of this, even though the models have trended down. I don't want you guys to let your guard down because we have some different tropical systems out there. Priscilla, we have Raymond, that tropical system as well in the Pacific, a different set of names, and just all that moisture coming in on them in Arizona. I just don't want you guys letting your guard down. The models probably aren't going to be able to see this very well, and I don't want people to, be thinking, well, maybe something here isn't as bad because some of the models are trended downward. And then all of a sudden things come up and, you definitely want to have the sandbags ready around Tucson, that general area, even Phoenix to some degree in southwestern New Mexico because there's some concern because the areas, can't handle the rain. Right now the forecast are for less than a half foot, but still notable amounts in some of those areas. So have to watch that, of course, from that national perspective, as we're looking at things and as we're tracking them. I know as we're going to go ahead and continue to give you guys the very latest here. I know we're just trying to keep you guys informed on what is happening. And let me just go ahead and talk more, though, about what has happened and weather history last year, a year ago yesterday. As I alluded to, and even this morning, we were talking about Milton a year ago. This time we were doing, I believe it's half-hour updates. So we've been on here at 2:30 in the morning. With Milton, that landfall already happened, but we were tracking its impacts in Flagler County, and then we were on hour after hour with all this storm, on that Wednesday, October 9th, made landfall at 8:30 there around Siesta Key, 115-mile-an-hour maximum sustained winds, and the minimum pressure there, the minimum central pressure, 958 millibars. Lower the pressure, the more powerful the storm. As you'll see with the other example, Michael was quite a bit lower than this. This was still really bad. It was kind of, in a way, breaking apart as it was getting closer, and we had a lot of instability. So there was shear instability mixed in there with, a deep low pressure, and we had a historic tornado outbreak toward areas around West Palm Beach and the like there, and in toward some of those areas. We had fatalities from tornadoes in Florida here in this pattern that Wednesday afternoon, that October 9th afternoon there in 2024. Before surge was bad, it was bad because of a lean-to, along this part of the coastline there. As that water was coming in, it wasn't the, worst case scenario, though. We didn't have what we could have had with this center and the surge coming, with the center maybe going just near North Tampa and the surge coming in on Tampa, because we still avoided a worst case scenario for Tampa that we haven't seen, since, so many people have moved in there. I mean, over 100 years really since we had a direct hit on Tampa still. So people need to be on alert here. Eventually something could be, right on Tampa, and it'll be even worse. We thought it happened with Charlie, thought it could happen with Milton, and it hasn't happened despite all the devastation that Charlie and Milton caused. There is a scenario where things can end up being way worse there, as we're looking at things and as we're tracking them. You just have to be. I know 1921 was the Tampa Bay hurricane, and that was a late October storm, so that means you still have to be paying attention this time of year. It was a Tampa Bay Tarpon Springs hurricane there in 1921 that hit on October 25th. Winds there around, landfall point in Tarpon Springs around 120 miles an hour. So as bad as Milton was, it made landfall. You had a lot of flooding. You obviously had the damage there toward the Tampa Bay Rays Tropicana Field, but things with the surge coming on into the bay could have been worse because the center, the wind, was bad up toward Tampa. The flooding rain was really bad as well, but the actual wind direction Instead of coming in, it was pushing out there, so you weren't having a surge to come with that there. So, there can be way worse than Milton, even though this was a deadly storm, a big deal. In the grand scheme of things in the country, and in terms of fatalities, it wasn't as tragic as Helene, but there were way, way too many fatalities still. One fatality is way too many. So, as we go ahead and look, though, at a storm that was even more powerful in terms of the meteorological properties, we're talking about major hurricane category 5, Hurricane Michael. Today is the 7th anniversary of that. It hit on Wednesday, October 10th there. The other one last year was Wednesday, October 9th. This, one in 2018 was Wednesday, October 10th, around 12:30 Central Time. Their maximum sustained winds 160 miles an hour. They're coming in right on Mexico Beach and those areas. That minimum pressure 919 millibars. Just an absolutely terrible, terrible storm there. As we were looking toward that area out there in toward those regions. I mean, Mariana, you see it on the map. Well, they got hit very hard. I mean, they had some areas, really a lot of areas without power for 2 weeks or so up there, and the damage, in terms of infrastructure was lasting even longer, with credit card machines still down a couple months later from personal experience going out there in Jackson County, on I-10 there in December of 2018. I got some pictures from that trip more. Gonna focus those from this, part of the show here tonight on further south. It was even worse. I've shown Mariana before, but let me go ahead and show you down toward Panama City. I know Panama City Beach didn't have it near as bad as Panama City itself, but here's a picture of just, wind devastation in Panama City, it would seem. You see Tyndall Air Force Base, the trees snapped, they're just awful. And then you see areas there around Mexico Beach, just all that, just awful devastation. The surge coming in on them, that wind was very bad too, and you see that surge impact there. Mexico Beach, another picture from that catastrophic Category 5 hurricane, one of the most powerful hurricanes to ever hit the U.S. there in terms of the meteorological properties there, in terms of those wind speeds, that pressure. Milton was bad. Michael's pressure was, one of the worst you'll ever see here. It came in right when it was strengthening. That's like your worst nightmare. Didn't, it wasn't like it was tied out for, a week ahead of time. I mean, that Sunday morning, looking at the model, and all of a sudden, the model, we were watching it, thought it may be a Cat 1, something like that hidden there. And then Sunday morning, the models went, crazy, ended up, showing something much more powerful. And then just a few days later on Wednesday, it hit as a Cat 5. It was a Cat 4 when it was happening, designated as that. But a Cat 5 in the post-analysis. I know we were tracking that. We weren't officially, calling things cloud weather back then, not until the following year in 2019. But here's a clip of some digital coverage I did from that just terrible, terrible event there, Michael, as it was making landfall. Meteorologist Casey Cloud. Go ahead and let me try that again. I have this show in here a little bit weird. I don't have that out ahead of what I need. So let me go ahead and try that again, because I think it's probably playing my voice there in the background. For a second, I gotta put that ahead of the graphics in the show. So let me go ahead and try that again. We'll go ahead and look back at some of that coverage here. That terrible, terrible event there 7 years ago today, as it happened. Meteorologist Casey Cloud here with an update on Major Hurricane Michael. We have a very serious situation occurring right now, especially in Bay and Gulf, and also even in the Franklin County as well. We have the northern Iowa and the eastern parts coming on the shore, producing significant wind gusts across the region. Report recently at Port St. Joe and the Gulf County Emergency Operations Center there. 106 miles an hour, folks. So this is a deadly storm. Gusts going to continue to increase. Storm surge going to continue to go up as well. A catastrophic threat across the region. Just an awful, awful event there with Hurricane Michael. Again, 7 years ago, and there's still signs of that damage today. As you're looking, I mean, haven't been back out there in a while, but just hearing stories. I mean, there has been a lot of rebuilding that's gone on. Though some areas completely rebuilt, but I'm sure there's still some of those areas that will never be the same. Obviously, I mean, some of the areas you have trees, and the trees aren't just gonna come back like they were, obviously. So let me go ahead and show you those some more here in terms of this the worst tropical cyclone by county since 1950. I know. You can see here Dora there, 10 different counties. That was what I would designate as the worst. That was, a storm here. We're talking about an anniversary last month here. obviously that, fateful situation for Jacksonville, Stark, St. Augustine, and the like here is still, the worst one we've had. As we're looking back here over the last, 75 years or so. And maybe late 1800s, a little worse for Stark based on some different historical details. But I know Doris, and even that one, for Stark, Dora was very bad. It was worse than Irma for Stark, but it still isn't the worst case scenario. You could still have a storm like Michael come in, because Dora was a Cat 2 to Cat 3 borderline on there coming on in. If you have, a storm like that, it's still maybe a hurricane in Stark, but if you have Cat 5 coming in from there, you could still have maybe a major hurricane coming into Stark here, and that would be, absolutely awful. You'd be talking about, trees that you would not imagine just coming down, and a lot of, damage just all over the place. So you always have to be prepared for something like that. So, if you, let's say, maybe a storm coming in right there on that, maybe right around Marineland there, and making a beeline to the northwest as quick as it can, and that's about your worst case scenario for a Stark, probably. West northwest, northwest, something like that there. Yeah, obviously. So let's say, that worst case, let's say around Marineland. I mean, it could be different because your door came more due east to west, but I'm just kind of trying to give it a little bit more of, a scenario here where it really is just making that beeline on in here, with that speed and the like, that overall veracity of things here, really getting in that northern eye wall and the like, that would be something coming in from the southeast up to the northwest, something like that would be a little bit, even more problematic, with everybody, Bradford maybe even getting that eye wall, in the northern strongest part of the eye wall. But that's the theoretical. Let's hope that doesn't happen. We don't want to see that, obviously. But you see, obviously, Michael, though, as you're tracking things here, you do always have to be prepared, though, because who would have thought Michael did what it could do, would do what it did. As we're looking out there, just unbelievable, because that area had not been hit that often. Never had a Cat 4, Cat 5 around Panama City before that in the recorded record. And then you had what you had with Michael, just absolutely awful. And you see it's still a storm of record for 10 of our western zones there, Alberta in 94, because of all the flooding, is the storm of note in some of these zones up there. But based on my assessment, of course, some areas are going to have, Michael's wind damage maybe being more in their mind, because maybe they weren't right, in a more vulnerable area because of the Flint River flooding or something like that. So it's all relative, and, in different parts of the county, different neighborhoods, maybe your worst is different than what I put for the county in general. It's trickier. Looking at some of the bigger cities in each county too, to try to see, well, maybe one part of the county that were the bigger cities were got it worse from this storm, but another storm, it was another part of the county that was, a system where, that system was worse in that part, but there's a more rural, so it's tricky, but all relative. Any storm can have a big impact here, in your neighborhood based. I mean, you can have a weak tropical storm and get a tornado hit your house. I mean, not out of the question, but, tropical climatology here, you can see as we're looking, we're into almost mid-October now, and it's a situation where we are seeing the chances of systems out there, storms a day per se lower, but we have 2 right now as we're looking and as we're tracking things, Jerry and Karen, but they're not a problem for us. That's the great news. We have, not expecting to become tropical to the east, but we have that spin that we're watching a coastal low, but it's not showing signs of tropical development. Still got to remain alert. We showed you in the example there in my discussion when I was talking about, we had Milton. Well, 2 weeks later, back in 1921, we had, and it wasn't 2 weeks later that year, but I'm just saying 2 weeks later in the yearly calendar on the 25th of October in 1921, we had a very powerful hurricane come right in on Tampa. So things can happen later in the year that are less likely. Wilma, Nicole, Kate, all examples of that here as we're looking. Now, the Georgia drought monitor, I'm kind of making a departure here. I know we talked about, that flood in 94, and toward southwest Georgia. Well, right now, we kind of have a polar opposite here, not completely, because this isn't near as impactful, but At this point, thankfully, just cross your fingers. But south central Georgia, we do have an extreme drought there for the Moultrie area there in Colquitt County, for instance. That area in and around there, that's where you have your extreme drought. That's a 4 out of 5, or well, let's check that 3 out of 4, I guess. I mean, I'm looking at this. I mean, technically, you could say 4 out of 5 because 0 is a category here, but that's how they do it there with the drought monitor. So, I know that can be a little bit, hard to figure out sometimes. There's some, I'm looking at the radar up there, and let's see that actually, because I know we said it to you once, but just in comparison to this, I mean, this goes through, Tuesday with that early Tuesday. Let me go ahead and switch from the graphics for a moment here. Let me switch from the graphics. You can see around Moultrie there. There's some rain to the north around Doran there. And let's see, storm total. You see some of the areas about an inch, in the county. So we could, use that even more so around Moultrie. So this might end up getting in. We'll see. Check the movement on this. Well, backing it up. So obviously, it's a situation where I might get, some more formation, but it's going to be kind of tricky there because this is more going to the north, and some of that formation has been more, with the totals further up there. So that's unfortunate, but as we're looking at, as we're tracking things on a different look at things here as well, as you're looking up toward Colquitt County there. So they do need that rain very badly, though. Again, let's just say we go back to the drought monitor. Again, I don't know if I really told Georgia very much, but I had to show it because of that 3 out of 4, 4 out of 5. Again, however you want to describe this here. I mean, really, let's just call it 4 out of 5. Again, with the extreme drought there for Colquitt County and that surrounding zone, and you have a severe drought, in more of southwest and south central, and even getting a little bit in the southeast Georgia technically. That is not what you want to see here. Obviously, we do need to rain in those areas. Aren't getting as much in the forecast. As we're looking at things, you can kind of see that more so to the east here, that rainfall forecast. As we're kind of giving you guys a look at things here. A couple inches, few inches. I mean, some areas could get several inches there, and eastern Duval and the St. John's Flagler. And the models have had a really tough time. I mean, they were going. One of the models, HRRR, was showing like 10 inches for parts of our area here. As we're looking for, the overnight now we're talking about, I didn't really, I thought, well, we got to remain on guard, but it hadn't really been consistent, so I didn't want to talk about it like that ahead of time, and we haven't seen that. But some areas still, could get some training here that leads to some flash flooding in some poor drainage areas there. We'll have to watch out for that. Eastern North Carolina up the coast of New Jersey, and like a bit of rain, wind, to coastal flooding, though. That is a concern. I talk about, flash flooding. We're talking about more land areas. Well, we do have to talk about that coastal flood alert. We talked about that earlier on with the graphic. Let me pull that back in here and kind of go over that again. I know we have a lot of moving parts here tonight to everything. So let me just kind of switch things over again to that source, because I think this is important to touch on here with the overall alert. So let me go ahead and show this to you there. That green indicates where that coastal flood alert is here. As we're looking, let me go ahead and read the information from the Weather Service in Jacksonville here. 2:11 a.m. they sent the latest update. Coastal flood warning remains in effect from 10 a.m. this morning to 6 a.m. Sunday. As we're looking toward parts of coastal Nassau, those coastal zones there, coastal Duval, coastal Flagler, northeast coastal St. John, southeast coastal St. John's, coastal Glen, and coastal Camden. And then we also have a coastal flood warning from 10 a.m. this morning to 6 a.m. Sunday for parts of inland Flagler, really, all of inland Flagler. Technically, I know it's a little tricky because not everybody's on the water there, but as you're seeing, we also have parts of St. John's on there with western St. John's and this other statement. Eastern Clay, Eastern Putnam, the Trout River, South Central Duval. So, kind of giving you guys an idea here. Numerous roads may be closed. Low-lying property, including homes, businesses, and some critical infrastructure could have some problems, And then shoreline erosion is that, threat that is going to occur. Take the necessary precautions to protect flood-prone property. If travel is required, make sure you don't drive through or around barricades there or through unknown depths there of water, water that's too deep. So that's kind of the storyline there. Let me go ahead and jump back on over toward the graphics here. As we're looking, I do want to show you some more here with the drought monitor. Toward Florida, you see it's less, but there's still a severe drought. Ports of Leon, Jefferson, Madison, all of Hamilton, Suwannee, and in parts of Columbia there as well. You see a moderate drought through Bradford County. We have got some rain. We've had even rain since that early Tuesday, but not necessarily enough here. As we're looking at things, we do need some more precip. Not expecting a lot after the next couple of days here. Not even now that we're expecting a whole bunch toward our inland zones and, out for the west. Now, way further west toward Arizona, we do have a flash flood threat. This is the rainfall forecast, last 7 days. The last one I put it in here anyway. And these update, they may have, sent out a new update on this. They probably did since I was even able to get this in here, but it probably wouldn't change too much. But you see southeast Arizona, southwest New Mexico here, 2-3 inches on average, but some areas could get more. As I was mentioning, some modeling way worse with that than what it's showing here. Some, models way worse, but let's just say here for a broad brush, 2 to 3, the isolated 6 there for, those areas there in southeast and even in the central Arizona and in southwest New Mexico, and that the 6 inches in a desert area could be a catastrophe for a few neighborhoods. A flash flood emergency or two, definitely not off the table in that instance. And you see southwestern parts of Colorado, even more rain expected. And, those aren't maybe, headline-making towns in general, but that is a lot of rain. That could cause some big flooding issues there. That's in the vicinity of, but kind of south and east of Grand Junction in a way, as they're looking. So even if they're more rural, they still could make headlines in theory, as we're looking and as we're tracking things. And let's go ahead and see, there's some high school football now, lighter topic. There's weather forecast. You see Newberry playing at Bradford. Bradford 6-1, a game on the radio, and they're in person as well at David Hurst Stadium there in Stark. You see around 70 degrees, 50% chance of rain. Mostly cloudy, breezy to windy with some showers possible. So just have that poncho in hand. I know I'm splitting it right at 50. Some models are showing quite a bit of rain to the north and the east, and I don't want to have people unprepared there. So the model's kind of showing it stopped right at Bradford. I know a lot of the games we've had them high, and rain hasn't really happened. But, there's a chance that it could really happen, and there's a chance that we don't really get anything at all. It's just kind of breezy to windy, though. So it could be a little cool. Might get a light windbreaker. It might not be a bad idea around 70 with breezy to windy out there compared to what, we've been seeing in previous weeks. And we're going to even see later on. We're going to have a drier, warm temperature storyline as you'll see in the forecast here as we look ahead into the timeline. So that'll be something we're watching here and we're tracking. We'll have a drier warmness, but this is cool here. And, we're going to see the temperature get back up again, but not going to have as much humidity. As you see, a nice day in Tallahassee. It looks like a bit breezy, but not as many clouds as here in Stark where I'm at. You see middle 70s, just a 10% chance of rain. So now we're expecting precip over there. Games at noon on the ACC network and, on ESPN. I believe it'll be like, a different kind of broadcast on ACC network there. And then ESPN is the main broadcast. FSC number 25, if they want to hold on to that ranking, they need to win that game. And they might need to win it, pretty convincingly even, based on other teams below them, around them in the rankings. Because they could still lose if they just barely won against the Panthers there. So let's go ahead and say Jacksonville against Seattle, the Jaguars. What a great performance by Trevor Lawrence there, Liam Cohen. What a great job by General Manager James Gladstone to put everything together, working with Tony Baselli and the owner there, of course, Saad Khan. Everything going really good right now for the Jaguars. And that game against Seattle and Sam Darnold there will be at 1 o'clock on Sunday on Fox 30. Then Jacksonville, Fox 35 in Orlando, Fox 49 Tallahassee, Fox 51 Gainesville, Ocala. Now, don't believe Fox and Albany has that scheduled to show right now in Albany, Georgia. It's still kind of regional for the Jags being as good as they are and Seattle being a good team as well. I know the Cowboys and the Panthers, that game's going to get more coverage in the national grand scheme of things in terms of the geography, it seems. But looking at some of the TV listings. But you see middle 70s there, just a 10% chance of rain. If this came on Saturday, it'd be way worse weather for this probably. You know, if it's Saturday at 1, but Sunday at 1, we're going to be clearing out. You know, breeze still holding on some clouds still holding on, maybe a passing shower, but a chance pretty low. You know, only 10%, that's really low, just, and for comparison's sake. So, again, as we're looking there at the big picture. Let's go ahead and see the big picture for the planning forecast. I know we have that Columbus Day weekend, holiday weekend for some. Some don't have it off, unfortunately. But you see 60% here on that Friday, 50% on that Saturday, 20% on that Sunday. So this is the broad brush. I know it might be a little confusing. 60% on Friday. You see that, and you saw 50% for a start for Friday night. Well, earlier on, and especially even not as much by the timeline, just the east in our area. It may, some might be later too, sure. But east in our areas where we have, but some of that maybe holding on a little longer, our eastern zones, may have more precip here. So got to remain alert for that. Your 50% chance of rain for that Saturday. Well, that's the situation there. Where we're going to have, I know you saw this 10% for Tallahassee, but still pretty high in our eastern zones. But Sunday, that's early in the day. By the afternoon, you really start to see it lower, as I said, for Duval there. And then Monday, even lower. You see temperatures starting to inch up. But, I mean, it's going to be pretty cool there. Cloudy but cool earlier on. Starting to clear out Saturday, Sunday, as you get the idea here. And then I just don't want to go too long rain chances either, because some areas in our eastern zones, like Flagler, maybe, it could be a flash flood threat or a flood threat, besides the coastal flood threat, obviously, we already have, from the actual tides and the, winds pushing all that in, causing the erosion. You can actually have the precip there that causes some of that flooding too, like St. Augustine or something, a more urban and flood-prone area there. But you see here, 59 by Tuesday morning there. So warming back up just slightly, but Tuesday morning is, warmer than Monday morning. On Columbus Day morning, I'm down to 57 now. Overall, some areas could get, mid-50s, rural areas, maybe even, like, I wouldn't be surprised if we see some, like, 52s, 53s in some very rural areas in our 62 counties, but some of those coast areas will be a little warmer, so we have to account for that. So that is going to be nice, almost, like jacket weather, for some of you, especially, those kids getting out of the bus stop there, probably, picking them off later in the day, just don't lose their jackets at school, but, as you get up there toward Tuesday, you can see 85 degrees there as we're looking ahead. I know it's an interesting topic. I wasn't going to bring this up. Just thought of this in first grade. I lost my jacket at school there down at Hampton Elementary, and never found that one. But, as we're tracking things here. But as you see here, as you look ahead into toward the timeline, you can see, as we're tracking things, 61 there by that Wednesday morning, 62 by that Thursday morning there. You can see those highs, mid-80s, so starting to up, but it's a little bit drier, not as humid, so it's not quite as bad as it looks, even though it will be starting to get pretty far above average there. It's not 85, 86. There'll be some humidity, but not as. Lows tell the story, because if you had more humidity, those lows would be closer to mid or upper 60s there. Upper 60s being the more predominant story with that. Lower 60s with that's more of just, starting to get that contrast. Some people might start calling it, getting close to that chapstick weather even. So not quite maybe there for a lot of folks, but, getting down to that lower humidity compared to what we've been seeing. So as we're looking and as we're tracking things here, that's something that we'll be mindful of. Obviously, the dew point measures the moisture content at lower levels there, and that'll be lower, which will result in, drier and more of a contrast from the morning to the afternoon. So that's kind of the storyline there with everything. I know as we're tracking things, let me go ahead and just throw it up to our other source again. And that is going to be the look at our local area on the one radar source here. See all that accent to the east? We'll just to see. I mean, the models are not going to handle this very well how far each set goes. You obviously see how cool it is there. So we're like Tallahassee compared to even, like Jack's Beach. I mean, there's less cloud cover out there in general. I mean, look at, and then, as we're looking at things, as we're tracking things, they're down to 61 there in Early County, Georgia, for instance. So as we're giving you guys a look at the overall situation. I know just kind of watching here, there is, in theory, the rotational parameters, and we do have some instability. It's not quite enough overlap to probably get much of a severe chance, but in theory, you could have a water spout close to the coast. We'll watch that just in case something happens. The flood threat would be something that I'd be a little more concerned about than anything else. Coastal flooding mixing maybe with, urban flooding would be not as much of like a flash flood warning being needed unless it really just starts to mix in a bad way. But it's not off the table. So we'll be remaining alert for that. I know nothing, not even in the same, stratosphere per se, what we had 7 years ago in those western zones, and especially further west with Hurricane Michael. Let's take another look back at that, snippet there of some digital coverage I did of that, this fateful storm. Everybody, all these hurricanes, my thoughts and prayers go out to you, all the different impacts you've had, wherever you are with some of those greatest concerns. But here's another look back, at that terrible situation as it happened. Meteorologist Casey Cloud here with an update on Major Hurricane Michael. We have a very serious situation occurring right now, especially in Bay and Gulf, and also even in the Franklin County as well. We have the northern Iowa and the eastern parts coming on the shore, producing significant wind gusts across the region. A report recently at Port St. Joe and the Gulf County Emergency Operations Center there. 106 miles an hour, folks. So this is a deadly storm. Gusts going to continue to increase. Storm surge going to continue to go up as well. A catastrophic threat across the region. Back live here again. 7 years ago today, that fateful storm coming on in. It was just awful. I mean, remember seeing some of the local coverage, those big operations there at the time. I know WMBV and WJHG, they both ended up going off the air because things were just so volatile there with the overall meteorological conditions as that storm system was making landfall. It was just a terrible situation. Internet and, like phone connections not working, people not knowing if their loved ones were safe there out toward that area for a while. Just an absolutely awful, awful scenario there, in toward those communities. Even though we're some of our western counties before we were officially doing cloud weather with the 62 counties and the like. As we look here, though, here's the platforms I'm on. Again, just terrible with all the hurricanes. I thought the prayers go out to everybody still. I know it's been 7 years. Doesn't seem like it. But, as you see your Facebook, Casey Cloud Reacts Cloud Weather. You have Twitter / at Cloud Casey. You have YouTube at Cloud Weather. You have Twitch Cloud Weather. And you have cloudweather.com. I know. Just trying to give you guys all the different latest updates on all the different platforms here. Trying to keep you guys safe and informed. Let me see if there's any questions or comments real quick. Bear with me. Got a couple people watching on YouTube. It looks like I see you guys tuning in live. Somebody watching on Twitch there. Again, I appreciate everybody tuning in and trusting me here on this, update. I'm watching live in the night, or if you're watching on demand later on, I appreciate you guys as well. And pop in if we need to over the days to come if we have anything. That's a big deal, obviously. Otherwise, I'll be back on late Tuesday, another formal update. I know, there was way out there, in toward the globe, a earthquake that was prompting some tsunami concern out there as we were looking, but not toward the U.S. necessarily, but around the Philippines. We're keeping an eye on that, obviously, but not necessarily toward the U.S., but always going to be watching out for stuff like that. It can always happen, just all of a sudden, and, we had that threat at least back up, I think it was late July, if I recall. We had to be on for that because you just never knew what could happen. We ended up having like 5 feet in a few of the more vulnerable spots in Hawaii and California, give or take, with that height. A lot of other areas are way less, but you can have astronomically higher. I mean, you can have just tsunami that's dozens and dozens. I mean, 100 feet high, even in some of those worst case scenarios. As they're looking here, I know in 2004, some of that tsunami accident, sadly, and some of those areas there impacted in the Indian Ocean was 167 feet high, and that's just, I mean, you talk about storm surge being 10, 20 feet in our area, and that's a catastrophe. Some of these areas, I mean, out there, 167 feet, I mean, you just understand why, and sometimes you don't, it's hard, I mean, this is going to happen, and then you have not that much time to make changes there to get to the safer spot. And that's why you understand why so many people, thousands of people lose their life in the catastrophic events like '04 and that area there on the in the Indian Ocean there around Indonesia, and then 2011 there, Japan area. So that's gonna do it for now. Have a great night. Stay safe, and we'll pop back in. The coastal flooding around here is a couple figures, still noteworthy, but nothing compared to what we've been talking about with some of these other stories with tsunamis or hurricanes. Still can be dangerous, if you're not careful. A few spots you're gonna have some water over the road, and the like. Coastal flood warning does remain in effect, as we're looking there. And we do have some gusty winds, occasional tropical storm force gusts there in a few of our eastern counties, not off the table. So just be remaining alert for all that. Have a great night. Have a great weekend. Stay safe.